As a longtime fan of anything automotive, as you can tell by our background, we have parts galore behind me. I'm wearing a Nissan GTR t-shirt, and the channel is called Car Rant. You could safely assume that we are, in fact, an automotive channel. With that territory comes a love for anything car-related, whether it be simple modifications on our vehicles to playing video games with our friends. But the problem is that we as car enthusiasts are not getting a good shake in video games. In fact, we're more likely to get rehashed the same game over and over with just a new number in front of it, instead of one that's got a quality story and something to do. Today, let's talk about how car video games actually kind of suck. What's up, everybody? My name is Nick Lanza. This is Car Rant, and here we do builds, we do reviews, and we have candid conversations about car stuff. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please stick around, hit that sub button. Let's talk about this. I actually became a really big car enthusiast because of the result of Need for Speed Carbon, one of my all-time favorite car games, and quite frankly, one that is massively underrated when compared to some of these other titles like Hot Pursuit and things of that nature. This is a game whose hero car was my dream car, and it was right there on the cover, a Mitsubishi Evo somehow drifting on a canyon bend. And as 10-year-old me would come to find out, not exactly possible in real life, but it would look real good in a video game, and more importantly, it left a very long-lasting impression to the point of I bought my own Evo just 10 years later. This was a video game that solidified for me my love of Japanese Turbo 4s and anything to do with street racing and things of that nature. Obviously, can't do that stuff in real life, even though we all do at some point. But it was a fun, creative outlet to get that kind of automotive energy out of me. Flash forward years later to my life, and I've finally joined the 21st century and got an Xbox, because I was still on a GameCube up until that point, and I still have that GameCube actually. With my console, I bought a copy of Black Ops 2, but then I bought this game called Forza Motorsport 4, something that my brother still gives me grief about because he intentionally wrecked one of my cars in the game to try and make my dad lose. It was a very fun, track-oriented car racing game, something that I wasn't very familiar with, and of course, they are the competitor to the ever-famous Gran Turismo, who just had a very successful automotive movie release. These two titles are the titans in the industry of track racing, and of course, years later, there would be more video games in that vein, such as Assetto Corsa and even Formula One. But for a long time, your bread and butter was these two titles of Forza, if you had an Xbox, or Gran Turismo, if you had a PlayStation. As a result, your field of options is pretty limited. If you want to do track-oriented stuff, cool, but these were games with a limited number of tracks, and because of all the political nonsense behind the scenes, it meant that you were only allowed to drive certain cars on certain games and on certain tracks. And it meant that while you could do Suzuka Circuit in one game, you might not be able to in the next, and it made it very complicated to just have all the options all the time. And it also meant there was no story. You just progressed like you would normally, and it left, for me, a void, because my racing career driver guy is doing these cool things, but it didn't feel like there was enough reward for it, other than, cool, you get to drive this car now. And now you get to move up to this class of racing versus just what you had before. There was no grassrootsy feel to it, and that's when I went back to games like Forza Horizon and Need for Speed. These are games that are notorious for street culture. I mean, even in Horizon 1, you started out as a character who was completely unknown. No one knew who this guy was. You were a young upstart, and you were challenging the guy who ran the event and became the #1 driver at this event. Cool. Need for Speed has a lot of the same tropes in it. If you played the 2015 game, which has its own slew of issues, it was a similar situation. You started out with this small punk group of kids. It turned out they had some weird connections with the wrong people, and thus you were racing as police, and they had really famous people in there, such as, Ken Block, rest in peace, and other big name guys from around the world like Magnus Walker. Kind of a strange game, but it scratched the itch, I guess. It wasn't great. Again, the problem is that the progression just didn't feel real. It didn't feel grounded in reality because you have these superstars that you're dancing alongside of in this game. And while it was fun to challenge their cars in game like Nakai-san, it just lacked the genuine feel of a good old-fashioned just pull up to a stoplight and race somebody. There was no real consequences because if you failed, you didn't lose anything for it. So once again, I'm left with this cool grassrootsy story, but it runs out of steam so fast and there's really nowhere else to go. And the problem is, and this is the same thing with many other sports video games as well, you just reach the top and there's nowhere else to go. And while sure, being the champ is all cool, it's more fun when you get to defend that title. And this is why I'm saying that a lot of these car video games suck, because there's no continuity of story. There's something to be said when you are the top dog defending a title because you worked your way up to that point. Sure, it's fun to have these races because they have the post gameplay where now you're challenged by whomever at random times, but it doesn't feel the same as it's a new game. I'm now in a new place and I have this reputation behind me of being somebody serious. So if I'm a game developer, what do I do to be creative and unique and new in this space that's also not a old, worn out trope? The truth of the matter is that Need for Speed really did have some good storyline elements. I mean, for a good example, Carbon had you being the underdog, fighting your way back up because you were cast out of the city and now you're coming back and you're trying to regain your reputation and also prove your innocence in a crime that you literally are shown in the very first couple seconds of you starting a new game file. The problem is that that's a trope that they have rehashed many times, with Need for Speed Heat being the greatest and most recent example. Need for Speed Payback had some similar elements in it. I personally really enjoyed Payback. It was a lot of fun. It had slightly different takes on things, which made it more interesting. Characters in the game were also a lot more believable, relationable. There was more chemistry between the voice actors, which helped lend credence to what was happening on our screens. It was a better game overall. But Need for Speed Heat still had a lot to offer, including Lucio from Overwatch. So if I'm trying to develop a game that really harkens to that underdog trope while also trying to reach into some new territory, why not make a game that has you go from a zero, learning how your car works, to racing in the big leagues and maybe even making it all the way to, say, the top of Formula One? Why not have a story where you start out and you choose a path, and in that path you are making choices that lead to bigger and better things, and then the next game or expansion drops and that furthers that storyline? Or you could just sit there and do what Turn 10 did and keep making random expansions to Horizon that really don't make any sense, such as the Hot Wheels one. It didn't fit the same tropes. It worked, it was fun, but it would have been more cool to see, okay, now you're the champion, here are these people from other places challenging you on their turf, and now you go to those places to actually try and become the boss of that region. In our hypothetical game, you could have something similar where you go from the street racing circuits to getting noticed by somebody, so you get invited to play, say, in the DTM circuits, or IMSA, or one of these other smaller, quotation marks there, smaller racing leagues, and earn your way up until you get noticed by someone at the very top, and now you're racing Premier alongside Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Personally, that sounds like a better time for someone who's an avid fan of both sides of that equation, because you could always go back and race in the street and then go back and clap some cheeks on some Monaco track or something like that. Or maybe you don't want to go into professional racing at all and you just want to leave that whole thing aside. Being able to challenge people in newer and more complicated environments where you have to earn your way up yet again, or defend a title because now these guys are coming to you, that's more interesting than, all right, you beat everything, here's a shiny object over here that you need to spend $15 for, and it'll work half the time for the first 2 weeks, and then it'll be great after that, but by then you've already done everything and now you're bored. All that to say, car video games really need some sort of story, some sort of purpose, not just winning. Winning is great and it's a lot of fun, and you can still obviously buy the new games and everything else that go with that, but there's something to be said of consequence. And I think a very good example of this was the NBA 2K games. They introduced character backstory arcs that made your character success in game actually worth paying attention to. Brand deals, working out, contracts with these companies and things like that. Your success on court affected how those contracts work. That's way more interesting and something that actually exists in real life, both in the game side of things, but also with the sports. If a bad driver at IndyCar is real bad, their sponsors are going to have some things to say, and they might not be allowed to race for that team, and now they have to go through that process again. That is more consequential and more interesting, and especially in a sport that is so heavily driven by sponsorship, more so than I think any other form of entertainment on earth, racing games could really benefit from that kind of level of consequence. Because you see, you could be a winning driver, but if you have really bad PR, you're just going to be the villain that everyone roots against. Max Verstappen much? Or you could be a okay-ish driver, but people appreciate you because you're good at the PR stuff, aka Danica Patrick. These are elements that would absolutely make a game worth playing, and if we had some kind of way to shoehorn that into some of these games that we're interested in right now, even in games like the Need for Speed franchise, that would make our games so much better. Because now it's not just one unilateral facet, it's something you can care about. And that's what's been missing from racing games. So what do you think? Do you think I'm full of it? Do you think I just enjoy single player games too much and would rather have all that extra nonsense? Or do you think, yeah, this could really spruce up and make a genre of games that's been struggling for years do way better? Let us know in the comments section. I would love to carry on a conversation with you guys, because who knows, maybe there's an indie developer out there looking for ideas. We may have just given them a winning ticket bid. God bless you guys. We appreciate each and every one of y'all watching, and we'll see you on the next episode. God bless y'all, and peace. Need for Speed 2015. That was literally the game, was Need for Speed, yeah. It was super bad, but super good at the same time. Hot take, but yeah.